It is impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible. George Washington. The Fredericksburg Masonic Lodge No. 4 stands on Princess Anne Street in historic downtown Fredericksburg. It was at the lodge in 1752 that 21-year-old George Washington laid his hand on the King James Bible to give his oath to the Freemasons. An oath that he held for the rest of his life, and one that was shared by other Revolutionary War heroes who resided in this town. The 1668 Bible used for Washington's oath is still under the stewardship of the lodge, and they gave me the honor and rare privilege of viewing it.
Greetings, Worshipful Master Seth Roderick and Masonic historian Shelby Chandler. Thank you for having me not only in this historic room, but to also view the Bible that a 21-year-old George Washington took an oath on for this very lodge in 1752.
You're very welcome, Norman, and thank you for being here to help us both preserve and perpetuate the history of not only this very important historic item here. This item is the very Bible in which George Washington took his Masonic obligation on, but also to celebrate in this year that very pivotal moment in the history of not only our republic, but the history of the quintessential Mason, Washington himself, when he took his obligation on another Bible, taking the oath of office as our first president of the United States.
Shelby, as the Masonic Lodge historian, can you tell me some of the history behind this actual Bible?
Yes, in fact, this is a 1668 King James Version Bible that was made in Cambridge, England. What is interesting about this Bible is that it was created at a time of just right after the English Civil War, when the Parliamentarian Army pushed out the King of England at the time. And the person that was in charge of that army was a Sir Thomas Fairfax, who was a Mason. This is interesting because for the first time, it was Masons who came out into public office, and they served in those offices in the open. The reason why this is important is because Thomas Fairfax, the Commander-in-Chief of the Parliamentarian Army, 100 years later, it's this very same family that would mentor and train a young George Washington. Let us remember, Lawrence Washington, his older brother who lived at Mount Vernon, married Anne Fairfax. And when the Fairfax and the Washingtons became one family, they took in a young George Washington, trained and mentored him. They taught him to survey their lands. And as a result of that, their lands going all the way up to the Ohio River Valley, when the French encroached, they sent George Washington to the royal governor to allow him to remove the French from their property.
Seth, please tell me what this Bible not only means to you and the lodge, but also to our country as a whole.
Well, Norman, not only is it a very historic artifact for our lodge, something we hold very dear, by Washington placing his hand on this Bible, he was taking an obligation, a moral obligation, to the fraternity and to the Masonic ideals, which are brotherly love, relief, and truth. 1789, a few years later, Washington then was taking another obligation to the Constitution and to the people of the United States, being sworn in as our first president. In adherence to that first obligation he took in Fredericksburg Lodge, another Bible from St. John's Lodge in New York was hastily acquired and brought across the street so that Washington could again take an obligation to a higher authority.
Yes, a great example of taking an oath of such great responsibility is to do it to a higher power, to do it to none other than God himself.
And what is amazing about Washington, Norman, is the fact that on 2 occasions he gave up absolute power. This is a Masonic lesson where you have stewardship of authority, where you take authority or power, you use it for the betterment of others, and you pass it on. It's a stewardship. Washington understood this lesson because on those two occasions, he gave up absolute power. The first time was when the sword, his military sword, he handed to Congress, giving up his authority over the military. And the second time he did that is when he stepped down as President of the United States so that others may serve as well as him. They would have kept him as president if he wanted it. He chose to return home.
Well, Shelby, when King George III had heard that Washington, whom had just defeated not too long before that, his armies in the colonies, when he had heard that Washington was giving up absolute power to return to Mount Vernon, it's said that King George III said about Washington, if he had done this, he would be
The greatest man in the world. I am sure there was never a people who had more reason to acknowledge a divine interposition in their affairs than those of the United States.